So this is the categorical imperative. In Kant's words translated from German, always act so that you can will that your maxim can become a universal law. And that is the only moral rule in the world for him. The hardest universalist imaginable. Because a maxim, as you can tell, that is a principle for your action. So if there's something that you want to do, that is not necessarily a maxim. But in order to make it a maxim, you put every time in front of it. So let's use the example that he himself brings up. And that, too, is a pretty good example. I picked the best examples that he ever wrote in any book. I picked them and put them here. One is the store owner and the options, and the other one is the man who wants to borrow money. So that one is in the quote on page 287. So imagine that you are broke and you really, really need to borrow $100. And you think a friend of yours might be willing to lend you $100. But you also know that you're not going to be able to pay it back. Not now, maybe not for a long time, and maybe you're not even going to pay it back. So what you have to do is imagine, not just right now, I want to borrow $100 from my friend. You have to imagine every time you're broke, you're going to ask your friend or friends for $100. In other words, your action plus every time in front of it. Then it's a maxim. So anything that you could think of doing now and again, such as, for instance, if you have a morning class tomorrow morning and you're really tired, if you're thinking of sleeping in, that's not a maxim. But the maxim would be every time I'm exhausted on a Wednesday morning, I'm going to sleep in. So then it's a maxim. And he would run that through the categorical imperative also and try to persuade you that you shouldn't sleep in. Because according to Kant, that's breaking a rule and it wouldn't be right. Okay. So, but the one with the money, this is how he puts it in his own words. Okay, 287. A man in need finds himself forced to borrow money. He knows well he won't be able to repay it. But he sees also that he will not get any loan unless he firmly promises to repay it within a fixed time. He wants to make such a promise, but he still has conscience enough to ask himself whether it's not permissible and is contrary to duty to get out of difficulty in this way. Suppose, however, he decides to do so. The maxim of his action would then be expressed as follows. When I believe myself to be in need of money, I will borrow money and promise to pay it back, although I know I can never do so. So that's the maxim. Every time I'm broke, I'm going to promise to pay back a loan, but I have no intention of doing that. So that's the maxim. Maxims don't have to be good, right? They just have to be a generalized idea of what you're going to do. But then you have to take it to the next step. Step number 2, which is what Kant called universalizing your maxim. Meaning, in plain English, ask, what if everybody did this? So this is what he does next. He says here, I then transform the requirement of self-love into a universal law and put the question thus, how would things stand if my maxim were to become a universal law? So that is step number 2. Could I want what I intend to do right now to become a universal principle for everybody? Almost like a flick of a switch. You imagine that whatever it is that you want to do on a regular basis, you imagine that now it's okay for everybody to do it. As if you could do it by magic. And then you have to ask yourself, is that rational? Could you want that? Could you want to create a rule that says it's okay for everybody to lie about paying loans back if you are about to ask for a loan? So this is what Kant says here. He then sees at once that such a maxim could never hold as a universal law of nature and be consistent with itself, but must necessarily be self-contradictory. For the universality of a law which says that anyone believing himself to be in difficulty could promise whatever he pleases with the intention of not keeping it would make promising itself and the end to be attained thereby quite impossible inasmuch as no one would believe what was promised him, but would merely laugh at all such utterances as being vain pretenses. Yeah, so that's Kant's writing style. Okay, but of course what he's saying is, if you want to borrow $100 from a friend of yours, and you have set up your maxim, every time I'm broke, I'm going to try to borrow $100, and I'm going to promise to pay it back, but I can't, and I won't. And then you universalize it. Anybody who's broke can, from now on, lie about paying a loan back. And then you ask your friend for $100. And what's your friend going to say? Sure, because I trust you, although everybody else lies about paying loans back. No. You're not going to get $100 because you've set up a rule that says everybody can lie about paying loans back. Like magic, it works. Everybody's now lying about paying loans back. So can you now get a loan? No, because they're wise to you, because everybody else is lying. And that is the categorical imperative, that you imagine. Of course, this is not really going to happen. Not everybody's going to lie about paying loans back, right? But you have to imagine that a situation can happen where your rule for yourself is made into a universal principle, and that will now make it impossible for you to do whatever it was that you wanted to do. It undermines your maxim if everybody else is doing the same thing. And Kant says, well, there you have it. That's the only moral rule you ever need. And he says, everybody understands that.